Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We are going to wait a few moments for a few others to join, and then we'll get started. All right, so it's 5 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our discussion on sustainability abroad. We're excited to be joined by faculty members, both at the University of Virginia and the College of William and Mary. I'm Haley Spear, an Education Abroad Advisor at the University of Virginia. Marina, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm Marina Knapp. I'm a Global Education Advisor at William and Mary.
And we have both been working on sustainability initiatives within our 2 Education Abroad offices, and we will be this evening's moderators. But before introducing our panelists, I want to acknowledge that the path towards global sustainability is not a straight line with set milestones, but rather one that requires recognition of local challenges and opportunities. Through partnerships, we can share successes and failures to help each other move forward together. In this panel discussion, we hope that we can take a moment to reflect on lessons learned from abroad so we can continue our work to become better global citizens, both at home and abroad. We've invited 4 faculty who have spent time in various parts of the world, and we're excited to discuss why sustainability cannot be approached through a one-size-fits-all approach, and how we can use this recognition of differences to become more sustainable travelers. Also, we'd like to highlight that we will pause halfway through this session for a breakout room. We hope that you will thoughtfully engage with one another, though whether you turn your video on or leave it off is up to you. And we will also have time at the end for a Q&A. So if you would, please hold your questions until then. At that time, you may either raise your hand or submit the questions in the chat. Please leave your microphone off during the panel discussion until our breakout rooms. And then lastly, we'd like to note that this session is being recorded. So with that, Marina will go ahead and introduce our panelists.
Sure. Carrie, you are first on my list if you would like to introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Corfano. I'm a professor at McIntire School of Commerce at UVA, and it's been my pleasure to teach a Local Solutions to Global Problems course in Scandinavia with a focus really on Denmark, but also going into Sweden. And that course has gone every May until, of course, we've canceled for the pandemic 2 years in a row for a number of years. To give full credit, it was actually created by a retired professor, Brad Brown, who's very talented and had done over 30 programs. So it was really a fun way to see how Denmark in particular, but also Sweden, looks at sustainability differently, even though they have similar GDPs, similar growth, similar education, and yet they'll see the same problem we see, too many cars on the roads, and say we need fewer cars, where we might say we need bigger highways or more parking lots. And so it's a lot of fun to really take a place that is very entrepreneurial, but with a very different approach and look at it. I've also had the ability to teach a global sustainability course at the master's level, corporate resilience course focusing on sustainability and climate change. And prior to coming here, I taught sustainability at a number of different schools, including the University of Alberta up in Canada. So my perspective has been kind of fueled by all these different things.
Thanks, Carrie. John, you're next on my list.
Hey everyone, my name's John Swaddle. I'm the faculty director of the Institute for Integrated Conservation at William and Mary. I'm also a professor of biology and one of the chairs of our Committee on Sustainability, and we're authoring our climate action plan right now. I've led programs to the UK, where I'm from. So that's the sort of culture that I grew up in too as well, in terms of looking at sustainability issues, and also in Australia fairly recently too as well.
Thanks, John. Reid, you're next on my list.
Hey, I'm Reid Bailey at the University of Virginia. I'm in the School of Engineering. My engagement with international programs is I started a program in Argentina that we've run 13 times, taken over 300 students to Argentina to work on projects. And like Carrie, I've also worked in Scandinavia in a program I started in Sweden that we've run 6 times, focused on sustainability and working with clients in Sweden to do projects around sustainability. My connection to sustainability is really through the lens of circular economy and things like industrial ecology, but I'm certainly curious about broader issues than just those.
And Donna?
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Lashley. I am a professor in the William & Mary Chemistry Department. My area is organic chemistry, and my research is in the realm of drug development. But my connection to sustainability is that I was born in Iran, and when I was 5 years old, my family became war refugees, and we entered Germany. And I was raised in Germany. I'm a German citizen now. Germany is the #1 country as far as recycling goes worldwide. And as far as sustainability goes, we're in the top 10. So I was raised there. I spent the majority of my adult life there. So I have a lot to share with that. I'm also involved with study abroad at William & Mary. I've taken students to Cambridge before in the UK. And I'm also going to lead a group of students to Geneva, Switzerland this upcoming year. So I'm happy to share my experiences.
Well, thank you all again for being here on a Monday evening. And so with that, we'll get started and jump into our first question. So what we'd like to ask is, what were some of the challenges as it relates to sustainability that you witnessed abroad that may not be challenges here in the US? So for example, while working in Thessaloniki, Greece back in 2018, I noticed that single-use plastic water bottles were delivered to each diner's table without being requested. So what are some of the things that you may have noticed while abroad?
Who's going to flinch first, right? I'll jump in with some observations from Australia. So it's a huge, huge continent and so spread out, but not that many people live there. So transportation is a big issue in Australia. To get from one place to another, to get from one city or another, most people actually have to fly. Driving distances is just unfathomable. You'd be driving for weeks to get across the country almost. So, in most places in America, you can take a short trip in a car or catch a train, and maybe you have to fly from one place to another. But in Australia, you have to be flying pretty much all the time to do business, to go from one place to another. So that's an enormous carbon footprint that I saw. And they don't really have that many options. Public transportation in a lot of the cities is also not that well developed. So individual responsibilities for carbon footprints are pretty high too as well.
Thanks, John. That's really interesting. I studied abroad in Australia too, and also experienced that. But when you are driving and those signs say last stop for petrol, they are not kidding.
No, not kidding at all. And you don't want to get stuck in the middle of nowhere in Australia. Yeah, definitely.
Does anyone else? Carrie?
So I've got one that is actually more historical, but it explains why Denmark is so into renewable energy. And in some ways, we kind of assume they're greener than everybody, they're progressive. But in reality, it came back to the oil strikes and oil embargo that happened in the 70s. And one of the things that happened was everyone had their oil cut off. And at the same time that happened, there were waits, there were lines, everyone was trying to deal with it. Denmark came out and complained about it and said it was unethical. And so when when Saudi Arabia started basically having oil flow again, they waited another 6 months and punished Denmark. And nobody spoke up because other countries had been so negatively impacted by their lack of oil. They didn't want to risk also losing access to the oil. And the reason I tell that story and why it ties in is, yes, Denmark is very progressive in how they handle what they do with renewable energy, but part of it is they realized back then that as a small country without a lot of leverage, people weren't going to go to bat for them. They needed to become independent of oil so that they could be an independent sovereign nation that wasn't reliant for their GDP, for their success on other countries around them. So the reason I bring that up is I think it's a really interesting reason that when you see a country that is a leader, their motivation started out very much trying to protect themselves rather than being worried about the polar bears. So to me, it's just kind of an interesting backstory of how different countries and their stories, their behavior, or Australia, how it's built, can inform how they behave in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I was going to actually comment on a good thing about Denmark and Sweden is the bikeability of it. But interestingly, they find that what drives that is not people's desire to be sustainable. It's convenience. And their infrastructure is set up so that is the most convenient way to get from place to place. But I was going to actually, well, my answer before I heard what you said, Carrie, to build on what Dana said about Germany having the highest recycling rate. There are some people in Sweden who would argue with that, who say that Sweden recycles 99% of their waste, but they're fudging their numbers. What are they doing to fudge their numbers? Well, the way that they get to that high of a number is about 40-some% they actually recycle. The other percentage to get to 99, they burn. And they not only burn their own waste, they burn all of Europe's waste because they have these big loans to pay for these giant beasts that have to keep burning in order to supply heat and to supply electricity to their cities. And so I think it's a good example of the complexity of this. It's not easy, maybe, to build on what Haley was saying a little bit to start, that it's, there are so many good things about the commitment to incineration in Sweden. So that, yes, 99% of waste avoids the landfill. But there also are concerns that, of course, there are emissions from this burning, and there's also some perverse incentives to actually create and reward the creation of waste by having these incinerators. And admittedly, I know I said I go to Argentina a lot too, and I don't have my hat on there thinking about sustainability as much, but as I was reflecting on it, I think one of the biggest issues I happen to see, because we're in a very dry region of Argentina in Mendoza, is water and the equitable distribution of water. So some of the people we work with are on the very high end of the sort of equity equation. They're getting a disproportionate amount of their water for agriculture because they make a lot of money for the province. And the reverse with that would be also, of course, true, is that there's going to be a lot of challenge in getting water for some people in Argentina, because water is such a precious resource, as it is everywhere, but particularly in dry, arid regions like I go to in Argentina. And secondly, this is a funny thing. I don't think about this when I think about sustainability anymore. There's honestly just a lot of litter. That seems like we kind of forget when we're doing these high-tech incinerators, or we're thinking about complicated public transit systems, that there are a lot of places where the basics for sustainability still are being addressed, I think. And sometimes that can show up in some of the simplest things, like things that have been addressed maybe in other areas a decade or so earlier, or a little bit previously.
Thanks, Reid.
Yeah, Reid, that it reminds me a lot of, I worked for a year out in Cambodia on a tiny island that not many people even knew existed within their own country. And the waste management there was either burn it or throw it, over your house into the ocean and just let it float away. And it was just very interesting and different to be there and see that and be like, okay, we are really starting from a different point here in Cambodia than we were in the US. And like, how do we start conversations with the local community on, waste management when their options are severely limited? And it kind of, it made us think a little bit differently about how we were going to even approach the conversation, because it would be very different than how we would approach the conversation here, or even, you know, in Sweden or something like that.
To change tax, perhaps.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead, John. I'll talk after you.
Well, it's going to change tax a little bit to sort of the social lens of sustainability too, as well, to reflect on that. This varies quite a bit in my experience in Australia, but in Northern Territory, which is a bit like the Wild West of Australia, I have never witnessed as much overt racism as I ever have anywhere else in the world. And that's would be a shock, I think, to students getting off the plane and going into a program. Like it's just on the street. It's the way that Aboriginal and First Nations people are treated just openly was shocking to me. And I think that's something that we would have to, I work with students to sort of be prepared for that, not accepting it, but also it's really hard to challenge it when you're just a visitor to a nation like that. So it's something that you have to have really complex conversations with students to set them up to a situation where it's not entirely coming out of the blue for them.
So when I started thinking about this question, I had told the others in our pre-meeting that honestly, since I was raised in Germany, which is one of the top countries in recycling and sustainability, I have a hard time finding something that they in Germany do worse than, say, in the US. And I've lived here for about 13 years now. When I first came here, I had quite the shock of the lack of recycling and other things. I was just blown away. But one negative thing that I could probably say about Germany is, so Germans are very obedient, and if you put a law into place and say, okay, this is how you ought to do things, then that's how things are done. And they're not very understanding of foreigners. And of course, now we have issues with where we have refugees and people from other countries coming into Germany at a larger rate that don't necessarily know the way that things ought to be done. And there are fines associated. If you don't recycle correctly, you pay a hefty fine, and you have neighbors that are like, it causes conflict. And so they could probably do a much better job at integrating foreigners and training them how to do it, rather than having just a neighbor mob come at you and attack you and call the police on you, which is something that happens all the time. And that's also something that our students need to be aware of, because Germans are not shy letting you know if you're not recycling correct. If you just throw something in the wrong bin in the public transport, you get in trouble. So they could probably do a little bit friendlier job at that. So.
That's a good point too. It kind of highlights why orientation before we go is so important in some of these programs. So I want to kind of switch the conversation a little bit and talk about some of the positive things. What are some things that you have witnessed or experienced that were working well towards sustainability that we don't have here or we're not utilizing here in the US just yet?
Okay, so much comes to mind. Okay, when I first came here, I was blown away by the amount of disposable cups and trash that even people, just young people who are just lazy, they don't feel like doing dishes, they'll just use disposable cups and styrofoam cups and plates and plastic silverware, which is mind-boggling. Nobody would do this in Germany. In Germany, we have something and I didn't realize how unique it was until I came here, but when you buy drinks like water or sodas or whatever, you buy it in a big container of like 12 bottles, and they're usually glass. And then that container has a sort of a deposit on it. And when you're done drinking it, you just collect all your glass bottles, you return them to the store, you get your deposit back. Any plastic bottle, whether it's Coke or juice or milk or whatever, you return it to the store and you get a deposit back. And the deposit is just high enough to where you're not going to throw it away. It's like 30 cents a bottle or something. So you hang on to it. Even little Coke cans, every single Coke can is like 25 or 30 cents deposit. So you return all that. And it's very high tech. There are these sort of machines inside of the store. All you have to do is throw your stuff in the store and into this machine, and it just kind of scans it and it spits out a little deposit, and then you can use that to pay for stuff at that store, or you can just get your money back if you want. So nobody throws these things away because it's like actual high enough of money. Speaking of stores, the plastic bags are not free in Germany. They cost upward of 25 cents to 50 cents, depending on the price. So people are really incentivized to bring their own bags. So a lot of people just bring their own, not even plastic bags, but like recyclable material bags. So that's very, very common in Germany that people carry around their own bags. And as you know, here in Hawaii, for example, there was a huge issue with plastic bags and turtles and other aquatic life being endangered because of all of our plastic waste that ends up in the ocean. Just to name a few different things. As far as trash goes, household trash is separated into at least 4 or 5 different trash cans. You have your organic waste that goes into one trash. You have a lot of packaging, like for example, if you have some milk container or something, there's labels on it. And there's something called the green dot. Everything that has the green dot label on it goes into this one specific trash container. And again, there is a fine associated with it if you don't do this correctly, so you better do your job correctly. We also have one trash for just paper and cardboard. And then we have 3 different containers for glass: green glass, clear glass, and brown glass. And those containers, usually each household doesn't have their own, but each neighborhood has their own glass containers. So you can go over there and separate all your waste correctly. And people take pride in it. And honestly, as you know, Germany, we had issues with patriotism in the past that led to wars and very negative things. Now we revisit our patriotism and we look at it in a different lens. We take pride in keeping our country clean and beautiful and have our resources be available for generations to come. And that's a new form of patriotism that is shown up in Germany.
It sounds like they have really great systems of both positive and negative reinforcement. Sorry, Reid, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to build on your energy. And I think probably Carrie has seen a lot of those same things in Denmark as in Sweden. I love those machines that take the bottles back, right? You get excited. And I was really shocked when I went to Sweden, not shocked. I was surprised. I was like, I went to recycle. We were living in a little, like a Airbnb kind of thing. And there were like 8 or 9 bins. And I was coming from Charlottesville. I put all my recycling in one bin. And some of my neighbors put everything in one bin and it was sorted at the facility. So honestly, I was like, I was expecting it to be more advanced, like separating out the bottles was what we did like in the 70s and no one did it, right? Or 80s in the United States. Very few people would actually do it. And so it's the cultural difference that is valued and that people will learn that early. And it's part of the life there was that there's a system in place where that works and it just doesn't work here or hadn't worked as effectively. It was interesting. Most of my notes were about Sweden, and I'm finding that I want to talk about Argentina because we don't have a lot of representation from South America. And I think the thing that I love the most about sustainability in Argentina is people they make the most of what they have from wherever they are. And you might see photos or images of folks that are 6 people crammed into a car, literally, and their dog is on the trunk and they're driving to, the river to hang out and have an afternoon. And it's so easy and quick to judge that and think, oh my God, I can't believe these folks are endangering this dog and they're all cramming in this car and all their stuff's like barely tied down to the roof. But it doesn't take long, I don't think. It just takes a slight nudge for people to be like, how beautiful is that these people care enough about each other that despite having, a car that may not always run, not enough space for everybody in it, that they're going to make that happen. And there's something about the cultural sustainability there, I think, in terms of understanding and seeing the bonds that are there. But there's also some environmental sustainability that they're not all going there in 4 different cars and showing up with their jet skis and yada, 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 which would be the norm that might happen in some places. So that's sort of like, that's a beautiful part of Argentina I want to highlight. And Carrie, you can probably take the floor for Sweden and Denmark and just, I know what I love about Sweden, 99% recycling. That's what I love about it.
This may sound funny, and I don't know, Reid, but I was annoyed after I went to Denmark and then Sweden, and it was so easy to bike around and how flawless it was, and it wasn't hard to comprehend. And our course has 30 students on bikes. We have a professor at the beginning, professor at the end of the line. We get everyone to go miles that way. We bike everywhere almost.
Yeah.
And it's not hard. And then I come back and I'm hesitant to bike with my high school and college age kids because I just don't think it's safe on the roads. And it sounds funny, but every time I go, I just get a little bit annoyed at how easy it is and how easy it could be. But I don't see it done where there's like a lane that's safe and people in it. And there's just enough of a little lip that the cars don't go over at all. So it really, it's a mild thing, but that little tweak on the fact that the bike lane has a little lip really keeps the cars out of it.
Yeah.
And even, you know, when you're down in the corner at UVA, sometimes you've got to go into the bike lane to turn. And every time I do it, I just think about the differences and how easy it is. But my favorite thing about Denmark, and I know Sweden's done some of this too, is they do allotments and it fights on the macro level. So we talk about our individual behavior, but then in the corporate level, they wanted to put in wind turbines. And one of the things they did was they fought NIMBY, right? And NIMBY is not in my backyard. So that's the idea that, hey, I want wind turbines, but I don't want to look at it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. And so a lot of times you have problems with the zoning. Well, the Danes were just really straightforward about it, said, if you can see it, so they took wherever the wind turbine was and basically took a circle around it. If you can see the wind turbine, you get an option to invest in the wind turbine and get paid for what's being, the electricity that's being made. So if it's worth $10 million to put up a whole bunch of wind turbines that you're going to be able to see, 5 of it is automatically funded by whatever corporate, or maybe it's 8, or, you know, and it depends on the different things, but they'll always make sure that there is an allotment set aside that I can put $150, $500, $5,000. But if I can see it, I have an opportunity to invest. And what happens then? I look at that wind turbine and I no longer see something that blocks my view. I now see something that's going to help me in retirement or meet my bills. And it just is so smart. You know, it's one of those things, again, I'm like, that's just straightforward, right? It's not making things hard. It's not doing all kinds of zoning. And one of the things, one of the lectures that we had that was talking about this with us said was it cuts down on court costs, on petitions, on meetings, because people are excited to be able to invest and make money out of it. And I mean, it was just so simple. I kind of stood there like, why are we not doing that everywhere? So it's stuff like that that makes me fangirl. Yeah.
That's really fascinating, Carrie. I did not know all that, but definitely incentivizes having those wind turbines down the road.
Yeah. And if I do hear them, I'm not annoyed now because I know they're going into my bank account. So even if it's a small amount, it's like, that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, cha-ching, cha-ching. You hear it going around when it's working. That's awesome.
Right.
I can just add one thing is that in Germany, the wind turbines are also quite popular, but in recently, there's also been some negative environmental impacts, such as noise pollution, and which is why the people don't want it nearby, but also a lot of birds and bats get caught up and killed in there. So, you know, it's not completely 100% wonderful, but, you know, it's definitely better than some of the alternatives.
Dana, something for that, that's, there's a lot of research in this. More birds are killed by coal-fired plants, by flying over them, and also skyscrapers individually than there are from wind turbines. So it's still a problem with wind turbines, but they've also found that they paint them a different color, it significantly drops it. So there's some cool stuff on that. But it is, to your point, really interesting when you see those numbers. The numbers are actually way worse for some of the things we already have going on.
Yeah, especially skyscrapers.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd echo a lot of what people have said in Britain too as well. I wanted to add another comment that I'm sure other people will nod to as well. The scale of things is just different outside of the US. Everything is just so big and excessive and wasteful in the US. And especially in Europe, things are just constrained to be smaller, to be less wasteful. So you can't make a decision to overorder or to, you know, buy a huge car. You just can't do that. So I think something that students always remark on when they go abroad are those kinds of differences. And it's partly because of the constraints of the geography, but also there are decisions that governments have made about investing in infrastructure and putting limits on things. So people can't consume so much. I mean, the consumption per capita in the US is enormous relative to other nations. It's way at the top of the league on so many different metrics. And on some metrics, an order of magnitude more. And so, you know, when students travel abroad, they're just going to have to get ready for a different lifestyle. And maybe a lifestyle they actually enjoy. And I wish there were more ways to translate that back when you come back from study abroad programs.
You are very right, John. If you go abroad and come back and you order a meal in a restaurant, it is overwhelming the amount that we are given on our plates. So I want to pause for a moment and invite the chance for us to have individual conversations in breakout rooms. So while Marina works on that, the question that we would like for y'all to discuss is there anything you witnessed or learned from your time abroad that could be implemented back at home? So this will be just about a 4 or 5 minute discussion, and then we'll bring you right back. Great, welcome back. If you would, or if you have not yet, please go ahead and mute yourself again. We hope that y'all had insightful conversations in your breakout rooms. And it looks like we might need to re-spotlight our panelists. Perfect. All right, so while Marina does that, I will move on to our third question, which is about cultural sustainability. So what can we do to have positive relationships with the local culture? How can we prepare for this? What can you do after your time abroad to spread knowledge to others?
I think this is a really key issue for students to get the most out of any study abroad experience. And this is why we all have, preparation materials and courses that students are in. They're not just going abroad for the sake of being abroad. So, things that I've seen that have worked well is that students have to do some research themselves on the culture that they are visiting. And try in that, I've seen students do sort of role-playing type of situations. Now that Zooming like this is much more sort of acceptable, that this could happen. These kinds of conversations with host families or partners that you're going to visit before you go can happen much more easily. People are probably going to be more willing to do that, and you can learn ahead of time a little bit more about what to expect. And then on the flip side, something that I know a lot of people do, and I do too as well, that students have to write self-reflective things about the experience of being in a different culture, but then also encourage them to actually take action. Like, what is it that you've learned from being abroad, especially in a sustainability area, because there's so much to learn from being abroad in terms of sustainability, that you can do when you get back, even if it's just one thing. Sort of taking the do one thing concept, but translocating it from the place that you visited to how you've come home. What is something that you could do either for yourself or that you could try to influence other people too as well, to spread the sustainability practice that you've seen that you think could be taken up in the community that you live in?
I just agree with everything John said. The one thing I've seen my students do that was a surprise, so it wasn't what I was expecting, is they came back and a group of them actually decided that they were going to eat together once a week. This idea, because we eat locally sourced, we eat actually at a farm that does all heirloom vegetables and heirloom animals. And they came back like, I kind of forgot how good I feel when I eat healthy all the time. And I'm eating organic, I'm eating locally sourced, I'm eating seasonal. And it was like, yeah, that's better for me, but it's usually more expensive. And their idea of, I'm going to cook for a group once a week and having a communal food rather than ramen noodles over my assignment. I'm going to actually make time out, because they saw that in the cultures they were around. They saw the priority that was made on that and that balance of life. That was really interesting, that wasn't maybe the goal of the curriculum, but we did talk about locally sourced food and seasonal and all those things. And it made a big impact, I would say, on their behavior when they came back. And then they shared that with people that had not gone on the course with us. So that was neat to see, that people just realizing how tied they are to their food, which it's easy to get separated from it, especially when you're in a dorm and then you're doing dining halls and things like that.
That's a great point, Carrie. Would anyone else like to contribute? Donna?
I think one of the things that Americans are not used to is using public transportation, which is very common in Europe. So I think most of my students are mind blown that they can get so easily from A to B, and there's actually a set schedule and it's mostly on time, and you can actually rely on it and you can get from A to B and you don't need a car. Here in the US, the infrastructure of cities is such that literally, if you do not have a car, in most places you can't go shopping. The Walmart, everything's outside of the city. Whereas in Europe, the infrastructure of the cities are often where the supermarkets and things are just inbuilt into the center of the downtown, and you can just walk and get your groceries. So those are things that our students cannot easily change with the snap of a finger, but they are the leaders of tomorrow. So once they see these things, they might enter policy, they might enter who knows what, and they might be able to make a difference once they have seen that it can work. Another thing that we were actually talking about in the breakout room was air conditioning. Like Americans don't often realize that the vast majority of the world somehow manages without air conditioning. And no matter how hot it gets in the summer, which of course, yes, sure, it can lead to older people, dying from heat strokes and things. There's definitely that. And with global warming and things, that weather in Europe is also getting much hotter than it used to be. But still, somehow, for the most part, we manage with what we call windows. Do windows, open the windows, and and so those are just practices that people could easily come back and just try to use less air condition. And yeah.
Donna, on that point, I worked in Thessaloniki, Greece for 2 semesters and would arrive in September, and it was maybe like 80 degrees. And I would turn on the air conditioning in my room. And if I woke up with a cold the next day, my Greek coworkers would say, well, did you turn on your air conditioning? It makes you sick. Like they don't prefer it, even when it's really hot out.
I was gonna jump in on this, and I think I'm answering the question in a related way, but I was thinking about it a little differently, like, thinking about the way to get students engaged with a more authentic version of the local culture and to respect the local culture in how it is, not as a group to go in and fix something that's wrong with them, but to learn from and partner with. So it's related, I think, and I think I want to emphasize around that. I think it relates to whatever else is saying. It is like, yes, I agree with John about like the preparation is critical, but I think I find that it's like it's not sufficient. It's like preparation. The difference in how a student understands, like, tell me about the culture in Sweden after we've done all these readings and discussions, or tell me about the culture in Argentina after all these discussions and readings. And then we engage with them after the program on similar topics. And it's vastly different, right? The answers that we get. And the ones beforehand are much more around like symbols of the culture. Like it might be like they use a different currency. They eat dinner later. Maybe getting into rituals a little bit that are different in the, they drink mate, or they have a fika break for their coffee or whatever. Rarely, if ever, getting into values of the other culture. Like, well, why do they drink mate? Why do they drink it the way they do in Argentina? What's important about a fika in Sweden, and why do they do it? They're never there. And after the program, there's much more likelihood of hearing some discussions about not the symbols as much as like the values. And what I attribute that to in large part is getting students out of being, and if you're a student on this call, looking for programs that don't look like a tourist experience, that don't look like, oh yeah, that's cool, I go and do all these things that I kind of could do as a tourist, and it looks fun. But things that more authentically engage students with people from that community or culture. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's not one formula for that. Some is I live with a host family, right? In our case, I do these short-term programs, so that's not what we do. It's more, oh yeah, I work every day with the same people at this certain organization or company, and I get to know their rhythm of how they work. I'm kind of a coworker with them, and I really see them in a different way than I would if I came by to visit just for an afternoon, or a chat or something. And so that's where I'm just like, this idea of building. Yes, the readings are critical, so you're prepared for those deeper interactions, and the discussions are critical, but it's so important. You can do so much more, and you can go so deeper when you're starting to have interactions that are built upon a good foundation of of learning enough so that you're not coming in and judging and layering upon your own thoughts as much as you normally would. You try to reduce that, and you're like, oh no, I'm actually seeing how someone lives here, and I'm kind of living with them in a sense, in some aspect of their life. And I get a feel for the rhythm of what their life is like, whether you're literally living with them or just seeing what their life rhythm is like, I guess.
I think what Reid is saying is so important. And I've seen this also in the way that students have learned about the program and sort of reflected on it, maybe even a year later. For example, when I've taken students to London, I would have thought ahead of time that perhaps the things that they would remember and value and talk about are visiting some of the classic sort of tourist attractions. But actually what they talk about are, oh, that evening in the pub when we watched the opening game for the World Cup. And that guy, like, he was really good at darts. It was just like normal stuff. Or a group of students joining a bunch of 70, 80-year-olds to go play bingo on a Sunday when they had a day off, and just talking about how they grew up and stuff like that. And, as program leaders, we've got to be designing that in some form. We've got to be letting students sort of explore, which sort of gets into areas where, as someone who's leading a program, you're actually okay with students just making their own decisions. You should help them make good decisions in terms of the experience that they get out of being in that country.
I think you guys both, or everyone, brought up really good points. And Reid, I'm really glad you brought up the host families as well, because that's definitely, something that those students specifically reach, that have to deal with, that most students going abroad on international programs or researching abroad or whatever it might be, may not be having to deal with. And I think everyone's hit on some really great points, and I really appreciate you guys all being here. And I think we're gonna open things up to questions now, if anyone has any questions or just any general suggestions, if you guys are all good with that. And if not, then we can continue the conversation in general, but we'll just open things up now. And I see Dana up there has her hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I can't see anybody else because I'm on my phone, so I just thought I'd raise my hand. Guys, this is awesome. I'm learning so much and really appreciate the discussion that we're having. There's one thing that I experienced studying abroad that I want to know if it's typical and sort of what role that it might play in a variety of programs. But we talked about like waste, we talked about energy, we talked about transportation. We didn't talk a lot about experiences in nature. So like you can have nature experiences in the US. There's not, I don't know if there's as much of like a cultural learning element. So like, I don't know if it like, just like going to a natural area is typically incorporated into study abroad programs, but I was in college and studied abroad in Costa Rica, and with so much natural beauty, that was a huge part of my experience. So I wondered if you guys wanted to talk about the role that nature experiences play in study abroad learning.
I'd love to jump in on that. It's built into the curriculum for the program that I do in Denmark. And what's fun is we go to an island, Semso, and we bike around the island, and we stay in a youth hostel where we have a fire. And you've experienced this, and we spend time, but we also give them time to explore the island, and they can go to the beach, and then we do a hike. And then we have lunch at an organic brewery where every year, it's just one of my favorite things. The wife apologizes because everything is local, but the eggs are about a half mile away on another farm. And she seems like almost embarrassed that they don't have their own eggs. They do get them somewhere else, but everything else they grow themselves. And meanwhile, the student's like, really, a half mile away? This is what's, and of course it's in kilometers, but we spend all that time outside, and they just have some downtime to students that are very accomplished and very busy. And then we also do a tour with an urban planner in the city of Copenhagen with headsets, where we get to hear them talk, and we bike throughout Copenhagen, and they see urban areas and small parks and big parks and a community park where they actually grow their ingredients, and they have a pizza stove outside, a pizza oven, that the community gets together every Friday and makes pizzas, and everybody, puts toppings on it and does a kind of a community thing. And they actually have like a learning park in the city that we go to. So they really get to see what nature looks like in the city and what nature looks like in a very rural setting with a low population. And the students are always talking about the juxtaposition of the two, of what they saw. They didn't just see Denmark in one interpretation of nature. They saw versions of it. And so that's something that a lot of the students really like to see, because it makes them also say, oh, what can we do in an alleyway in Charlottesville? What can we do out in the Blue Ridge Mountains? Yeah, it helps them think about it that way.
One of the programs that I led in Australia, as an ecologist, we were just out in nature all the time. And one of the programs that I led, we all lived in tents for 2 months. There was no hot water, limited electricity. And it was, and we went exploring and found koalas and duck-billed platypus and, things that you only sort of see in zoos or hear about, but students can experience them themselves and avoid the venomous snakes. But it was a wonderful experience. And some of those students had a hard time coming back to living in a house. I know some of the students have been hardcore campers ever since that they've really appreciated the simplicity of just living under canvas and barely anything else.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? I have a question for our panelists then. If students were looking to go abroad, traveling or researching or just for fun, what suggestions would you give them as they're trying to plan their travels and in the very early stages? What would you ask them to consider if they wanted to make sure sustainability was a priority for them?
Well, I think I could build off what John said, is think about where you're staying. We stay in youth hostels that have a smaller, imprint, but often they're great locations. We have wonderful meals, but we also, we take them to grocery stores, and that idea, and we talk to them ahead of time about packing less. Like, you'll be surprised, you will need less than you think you need. And all those things, the ones that have less are more mobile, that we rent bikes, and I encourage them, if you're going to go on your own to other countries, look at what your options are to rent a bike to get around, because you get to see a lot more of what the people who live there see than if you're doing some of the other transportation. So it's all little things, but I think sometimes you can do so much research online now. You can really plan a lot of fun things and make sure you give yourself time to just explore and not pack everything in.
I think getting in the mindset that you're not going to have everything that you're used to in your own home there.
And you don't need it.
And you don't, yeah, exactly. And you learn that you don't need it, and you can even practice that. You can limit the ways that you use things and interact with things before you go to as well, to get a little bit used to it. And I think it's kind of really revealing to students that they can live out of a small suitcase for a few weeks and it's just totally fine. They don't need to have all the things that they have at home to be able to have a really happy, fulfilling time.
One other thing is that if you plan to see more than one place, let's say you want to travel around Germany or you want to travel around Europe, get out of the American mindset that you have to rent a car to get places. That's not the way to go. You can easily, even if you travel far distances, we have these high-speed trains, and it's just beautiful. You sit there by the window and you watch the, environment go by, and it's just beautiful. And you should look into that rather than getting a car. And even try not to think so much about flying. Are you going from Frankfurt to Berlin? Do you really have to fly? Can you take a train, take a bus? We also have a lot of ride shares. There's apps for ride shares. So even if you're taking a car with someone, you can, and it's fairly safe. It's like, sure, it's always a danger getting into a car with a stranger, but we use Uber and Lyft around here. So you're used to that. And so you can use these rideshare apps to get from A to B, even large distances. And so consider those things in traveling.
I grew up in the UK and I didn't even think about owning a car till my mid-20s. It wasn't something that was important at all.
Same, John. I didn't have a car until I was in my late 20s as well. And it was never a necessity in Frankfurt. In fact, it's a hassle because you can't find a parking spot anywhere.
Yeah. It's a burden because you have to start paying insurance and taxes and stuff like that on that. Why do that when you can just walk or catch a bus, catch a train. If you do
So-
catch a bus or a train, you meet people too as well. And that's one of the wonders of being in a different place. It's much more difficult to do that if you're crammed into a plane. If you're on a bus or a train, you can move around and interact with people.
Yeah, I think fortunately students have, if it's students who are doing this, you're more resource constrained than a lot of folks are. So taking economical ways of transport line up with your budget too. And they may line up with your lack of desire to like wash your clothes. There's no, why? You go a little extra between times when you wash your clothes. I know students in our programs do. I think thinking more broadly, and I certainly haven't, there's so many parts of the world I haven't traveled to. And so I say this with the recognition of that, but the thing, be respectful of the way people live where they are, and sustainability means different things in different places. And some places it's going to mean recycling stuff, right? In some places it's going to mean reusing things. Some places you're going to have alternatives like trains that are great. And some places you're not going to have alternatives that are great like trains. And so it just don't stress out about it. If you're in a place where some things that you think of as being sustainable aren't possible, because that's just not how it's practiced in the local community or culture that you're in. And try to be curious and learn, like, what are people doing here in terms of how they use energy and how they use materials and how they think about it, because that's a common thing that we all do. It's shared across the world, and different people think about it in different ways. So that's a little bit of what, I didn't have a great answer to this question coming in, I don't think, when you first asked it, Marina, but hearing folks' answers, I love everything that they said, but that doesn't apply everywhere. Some of the things that were mentioned that you can't do. Anyway.
Yeah, I think what Haley said at the very beginning, this is, shades of gray, not black and white. That's part of what makes this conversation so difficult, is there isn't a one size fits all answer. And we do have to kind of keep it open and adapt as necessary in what we have available.
Well, we have 3 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Are there any last questions from our audience members? All right. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. This was a fascinating conversation and our first, joint faculty panel discussion for Earth Month 2021, and we would love to be able to do it again. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and experiences around the world, and thanks to our attendees for joining this evening. And with that, we will close it out.
If there are any students in our audience, we are doing a sustainable program highlight on the 27th at noon, where we will be discussing some study abroad programs that focus academically on sustainability, climate change, and conservation. If anyone wants to take part in that, we will be sharing that information soon.
Thank you again.
Have a good
Thank you,
night.
Haley.
All
Thank you,
right.
Marina.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
sounds
for
everyone.
organizing.
Bye.
Really nice
Thank
meeting
you.
everybody.